Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to draw this sunset, so I'll landscape in colored pencil. Let's have a look. First I'm going to divide my scene into two parts of roughly the same size, with the line of the horizon a little bit lower on the left side and a little bit higher on the right. The surface I'm working on is a 1000 grit sandpaper, and the pencils I'm going to use are Faber Castell Polychromos colored pencils. I'm also going to have a path going down the middle and kind of leading from the foreground to the background. Here at the top I'm going to start with some slightly lighter, cooler tones. I'm going to use a little bit of light grey and some bluish tones, just to see what that will look like. And then I'll gradually make a transition towards the warmer colors in the middle, where the sun will be. I will place the sun roughly around the middle of my scene. Now I'm doing some blending with a tortillon, and I like to use homemade tortillons. I usually have at least 3 or 4 of them lying around because I like to use a different tortillon for different colors, so that I can avoid muddying the colors. And they blend pretty well on this surface. Now here at the bottom, near the horizon, I'm going to have some slightly darker and a bit more bluish tones, where I'm going to have some distant hills maybe. And I used a little bit of indigo blue and some slightly lighter ultramarine blue, and did a bit more blending with the tortillon. A different one, naturally. I'm gonna make a gradual transition from those bluish tones to the slightly warmer reddish and orange tones. And now I'm sketching the shape of that sun. It's going to be partly obscured by those distant clouds or hills, whatever they are. And I needed to put that in because I don't want to work with lighter colors on top of the darker ones if I don't have to. I want the sun to appear really bright, and I want it to be the lightest part of my scene. So now that I laid down some of these colors, starting from the red to the orange and then a little bit of yellow, I'm doing some blending and trying to make a more gradual transition, using mostly a couple of different tortillons. And so far it's working pretty well. The colors look a little bit unnatural at this point, but I will adjust them a little bit as I go along, and it'll all start to look a little bit better once I start adding some clouds in front of that background. So right now in this stage I just need to do a lot of blending because I want to minimize the amount of texture in that part of the scene, because it's the background, it's the sky, so there's not much detail there other than just a smooth gradient in colors. I'm adding a bit more value here at the bottom near the horizon, where I want some distant mountains maybe, or hills, to stand out. They can be barely visible there. I don't really need them to be very well defined. They're going to be partly obscured by the trees in that mid-ground area, but I'll get to that eventually. So I'm doing a bit more work on this middle and right side of the scene. I'm not going to cover all of it because in this top right part I'm going to have a lot of clouds, so I don't really need to cover all of the sky. I'm just going to lay down these warmer colors around the sun itself. So like I said, I want to have some warmer colors around the sun and some cooler colors away from that light source at the top. I added some slightly orangey and reddish tones in that source of light in the sun itself, and then made the middle portion the lightest using the ivory colored pencil and the white colored pencil. Now I'm adding some lighter clouds, or lighter parts of the clouds here, because some of these clouds which are closer to the light source will be catching some light. And I'm gonna make one part of these clouds on the left a little bit darker and the lower portion a bit lighter. And here, closer to the middle, I'm going to make some very light clouds. I'm going to draw some interrupted shapes, like some smaller scattered clouds. And I want these to be a lot lighter and brighter, like they're catching a lot of light from their light source. And if I feel like maybe they're a little bit too bright or too dull, I can always add a little bit of yellowish or orange color to them. Because initially I used ivory colored pencil. Ivory, by the way, is like a yellowish white. It's almost white. Now for this group of clouds, just above those smaller, lighter clouds, I'm going to make their lower portion a bit lighter, as you can see, and then add some slightly darker, stronger colors on top. The color I'm adding now is a carmine colored pencil. And it's kind of like slightly darker, duller red. And I'm adding a little bit of blue on top of that, making it a bit more purplish at the top. So I want to make another gradual transition from those reddish and purplish tones to the bluish tones at the top. Here on the right, I'm going to start drawing some trees on the horizon, and I deliberately want to place these trees so that they stand out against the sky. I need that contrast. I want those darker shapes against the lighter sky. And I'm going to use very dark colors for this. I'm even going to use a black colored pencil, but in addition to that I'm also going to use some other pencils, like for example, dark sepia, which is like a really dark brown. So now I'm back to working on these clouds on the right side and at the top, and doing a little bit of blending. I'm going to modify their shape a little bit and break it into smaller shapes so that they look a bit more natural. So I'm kind of jumping from one part of the scene to the other one, because that's just the way I feel like working. Although generally I work from left to right and from top to bottom, but that's not always the case. Colored pencils don't really smudge that much, even though on this surface, on sandpaper, they tend to blend a bit more easily, and they tend to be more easily moved than on regular paper. A lot of the effects that you will see here are not really feasible on regular paper, because on this paper I can layer a lot and I can easily add lighter details on top of the darker ones. On regular paper I wouldn't really be able to do that. I would have to use erasing, I would have to use a lot of planning, I would have to reserve some space for the lighter portions of the drawing. Here I can work in a much more relaxed and spontaneous manner, by laying down the darker bits first and then adding some lighter areas if necessary. I'm doing some additional blending with a brush, because sometimes a Tutillian isn't enough. But you have to be careful with your blending tools. What happens when you blend, especially when you blend with something such as a brush, it tends to dig into the tooth of the sandpaper and it tends to dig out a little bit of that pigment. So what can happen is it can reveal a little bit of the background color, which in my case is grayish. So that's something that you need to be aware of. You do a little bit of blending, and if it becomes duller, then you add a little bit more color on top. So it's a bit of a back and forth process. Here I'm just modifying the shape of the clouds, making them look a little bit more natural and a little bit wispier. And I'm also going to add a few more here on the left side as well, just for the sake of balance, I suppose, and to make that top left part of the sky a bit more interesting, because it was just almost plain grey, and I didn't want to leave it like that. The sun stands out nicely against the sky, because even though I have some lighter portions of the sky, the sun is obviously the brightest part of that scene, which is what I wanted to accomplish, which is why I needed to put in those lighter colors first. I said that I can easily add lighter colors on top of the darker ones, but sometimes there can be some muddying, and if you want something to be really bright, it's better to put lighter colors first, if you can. And here I was obviously able to do that because I had an idea where the sun is going to be. So now I'm going to move on to this grassy area in the foreground. But I also need to draw some trees on the horizon. Like I said, I'm going to use a lot of black colored pencil for this. And I'm also going to use some black colored pencil for this foreground area, because I want to make it darker. It's further away from the light source. There are maybe some shadows there. So I'm going to add some darker values there. For the grassy area, I first started with a bit of a raw umber, which is not what you would expect for grass, but because of the overall atmosphere and the overall lighting and colors, I maybe wanted to start with a little bit of those reddish and brownish tones. I will add a touch of green here and there, but for now I'm just sort of experimenting with these darker tones. And I'm blending with even my finger, because this is a larger surface and I don't really care too much about its appearance or texture. In fact, I'm deliberately trying to produce a little bit of texture so that I can create an illusion of detail. And the trick that I will use for the grass here is I will create more texture in the foreground and add more detail in the foreground, and allow the grass to become less detailed as you look further towards the horizon, because the blades of grass and the clumps of grass which are closer to us are going to be more defined in terms of shape, and they're also going to be larger, while the ones which are further back are going to be sort of disappearing in the distance, and their shape will be more and more difficult to discern, and they will kind of merge into a more or less a single color with a little bit less texture and contrast. I am going to add some details and some suggestions of blades of grass and some clumps of grass here in the foreground. I don't want to try to draw every single blade of grass. I just want to draw some suggestions of variation in that color and overall amount of value in that grass, which kind of follows the shape of the terrain, and which also suggests to the viewer that feeling of distance and depth, because the marks which are closer to us at the bottom are a little bit larger, whereas the ones which are further away are getting smaller and smaller. I made that bluish part above the horizon a little bit darker because I felt that it was a little bit too light, and this way the sun, I feel, stands out even better against the rest of the sky. And now I'm going to work on the path and the edge of the path, because the edge needs to be kind of rough and irregular looking, like some of the grass is growing into that path, and there's maybe even some patches of grass or clumps of grass growing on the path itself. Like some parts of it are well trodden and the others are maybe covered with a little bit of grass. So the edge needs to be fairly irregular so that I could make this look more realistic. And as you can see, the path is wider near our viewpoint at the bottom, and it's getting thinner and smaller as you look further into the distance. So we're using that path as another way of creating a feeling of depth and distance for the viewer. And I am also working on the grass on the right side now. I'm starting with the same colors that I used on the left side, and I'm also going to add a touch of yellowish green, just to have some greenish colors in there as well. Naturally, near the horizon, in the distance, there is less texture, less detail, and there is more detail in the foreground, closer to our viewpoint. I did a similar thing with this path. I added a bit more detail and a bit more texture at the bottom. And to finish the scene, I'm just going to add a few more trees on the right side. I want these to be slightly taller and to appear like they're slightly closer to us. I'm drawing some suggestions of branches and tree trunks. Some of the branches are going to be covered with clusters of leaves, others are going to be kind of bare. So I want a little bit of variation and randomness in that as well. It doesn't have to be all trees, maybe it can be a group of trees and bushes. So I want them to vary in size and height a little bit. But the main thing that I want to achieve is to have those darker shapes against the sky to create that contrast which will capture the attention of the viewer and help them understand these shapes a bit better. I also did a little bit of softening with a Tortillion because these are further in the distance, so maybe they need to be a little bit less defined. I added some more reddish color to some parts around the sun, to some parts of the sky around the sun. And I'm just fixing the shape of this line of the horizon and adding some smaller details with a black color pencil. These are some finishing touches because the drawing is almost done. I would like to remind you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and to give me a like and comment on my videos because that means a lot for my channel. I put a small signature in the lower left corner, sorry. And that's it, the drawing's done. And also, if you want to see longer videos and more content, you should check out my Patreon, because you can find some real-time footage there and some other stuff. So, thanks for watching. I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye.